I'm Savannah Mackenzie, 26, and I thought I knew my family until the day they dragged me to court over my grandfather's land inheritance. What started as a simple will reading turned into the most devastating betrayal of my life when my own parents sued me for $6.8 million worth of property that Grandpa explicitly left to me, but they had no idea what they were walking into. The judge's final ruling didn't just expose their greed, it revealed a family secret that changed everything forever. Before we dive into this wild family drama that'll make your blood boil, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you love stories about karma coming full circle and justice being served ice cold, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming, and you definitely don't want to miss how this family betrayal backfired in the most spectacular way possible. 3 months ago, I was living my quiet life as a veterinary assistant in Portland, Oregon, completely unaware that my world was about to implode. Grandpa Mackenzie had passed away 6 weeks earlier after a brief battle with pneumonia, and while I was still grieving, I thought the worst was behind us. Had been my rock growing up, especially after Dad became distant and Mom developed her shopping addiction that nearly bankrupted them twice. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was helping Dr. Rodriguez with a golden retriever's surgery. Mom's voice was strangely cheerful when she told me the family lawyer wanted to meet with all of us for the will reading. "It's just a formality, sweetheart," she said, but something in her tone felt off. "Your father and I already know what to expect." That should have been my first red flag. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. James Patterson had been Grandpa's attorney for over 30 years, and the somber expression on his weathered face told me this wasn't going to be the straightforward affair my parents had described. Mom sat rigidly beside Dad, both of them dressed like they were attending a business meeting rather than honoring my grandfather's final wishes. "Before we begin, Mr. Patterson said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "I need to explain that Edgar Mackenzie was very specific about his intentions. He updated his will multiple times in the past 2 years, and his final version was completed just 6 months before his death." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "James, we discussed this. The farm should obviously go to Robert and me as the sons. That's how it's always been done in this family." My Uncle Robert nodded vigorously. "Savannah's young. She doesn't understand the responsibility of managing 1,200 acres. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. Actually, Edgar left very detailed instructions. He was concerned about certain financial decisions made by family members and wanted to ensure his legacy remained intact. The reading began with small bequests to various relatives and charities. Uncle Robert received Grandpa's vintage truck collection, worth about $40,000. My cousins each got $10,000 for college funds. Then came the bombshell. To my beloved granddaughter, Savannah Elizabeth Mackenzie, who has shown unwavering integrity and genuine love without expectation of inheritance, I leave my entire property holdings, including the Mackenzie family farm, the adjoining timberland, and the mineral rights. Current estimated value, $6.8 million. The silence in that room was deafening. I literally couldn't breathe. $6.8 million? I knew the farm was valuable, but I thought it might be worth maybe $500,000 at most. Dad's face went purple. "That's impossible. He promised me that land when I took over the farming operations 15 years ago. I'm afraid there's more." Mr. Patterson continued. Edgar also left detailed documentation explaining his reasoning. He discovered that David and Margaret Mackenzie had been systematically stealing from him for the past 3 years. Mom's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide how pale she went. "That's absurd. We would never." He has bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals from his accounts totaling $147,000. He also documented instances where you sold his cattle and kept the proceeds, claiming the animals had died from disease. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be real. My parents weren't perfect, but they weren't thieves. Were they? Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Edgar suspected you were planning to have him declared mentally incompetent so you could gain control of his finances. He has recordings of conversations where you discussed having him committed to a memory care facility against his will. Dad slammed his hand on the table. He was getting senile. Someone needed to make responsible decisions. Actually, Edgar underwent a complete psychological evaluation just 4 months ago. Dr. Sarah Chen confirmed he was of completely sound mind. In fact, his cognitive function was above average for his age group. The pieces started falling into place. Dad's expensive new truck last year that he claimed was a business investment. Mom's sudden obsession with redecorating their entire house. The way they always seemed to have money for luxury items despite Dad constantly complaining about the farm's finances. Uncle Robert was sweating now. James, surely there's been some mistake. Dad wouldn't have left everything to Savannah. She doesn't even live on the farm anymore. Edgar felt that Savannah was the only family member who visited him regularly without asking for money. He noted that she brought him groceries, helped with household repairs, and genuinely cared about his well-being rather than his assets. It was true. Every Sunday for the past 5 years, I'd driven 45 minutes to spend the day with Grandpa, woodwork in his garden, watch old westerns, and talk about everything except money. I thought everyone did that. I thought that's what families did. Mom finally found her voice, but it was shaky. This is ridiculous. We're contesting this will immediately. Savannah is clearly not qualified to manage such valuable property. That's your prerogative, Mr. Patterson replied calmly. However, Edgar anticipated this possibility. Hess left very specific instructions for such a scenario. He pulled out another document. If anyone contests this will, Edgar has authorized the release of all evidence he collected regarding the theft, including video recordings from security cameras he secretly installed in his home 6 months ago. The room went dead silent again. Dad and Uncle Robert exchanged glances that made my blood run cold. They knew about those cameras, which meant they knew they'd been caught. Additionally, Mr. Patterson continued, Edgar hired a private investigator to document all suspicious financial activity. Those findings have been forwarded to the district attorney's office. Mom stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled over. We need time to process this information. Of course, Savannah, you'll need to come in tomorrow to sign the transfer documents. The property is yours free and clear, no liens or mortgages. As we walked out of that office, I felt like I was in a nightmare. My parents weren't just disappointed about not inheriting the farm, they were terrified. And I was starting to understand why. Savannah, Dad called out as I reached my car. We need to talk about this as a family. But the way he said family made my skin crawl. Because for the first time in my life, I realized that to my parents, I wasn't their daughter. I was their next victim. The drive home from the lawyer's office felt like traveling through a fever dream. My hands shook so badly I had to pull over twice. $6.8 million. My grandfather had left me more money than I'd ever see in 10 lifetimes. But more importantly, had also left me evidence that my parents were criminals. I spent that entire night reading through every document Mr. Patterson had given me. Grandpa had been meticulous. Bank statements showing mysterious withdrawals that coincided with my parents' expensive purchases, veterinary bills for cattle that had allegedly died but were actually sold at market prices. Most damning of all were transcribed phone conversations where Mom and Dad discussed having Grandpa declared incompetent. Hez getting too suspicious, Dad's voice had said in one recording. If we move fast enough, we can get medical power of attorney before he figures out how much we've taken. Mom's response made me physically sick. Savannah visits too often. She might notice if we put him in that memory care place. Maybe we should limit her access. They'd been planning to isolate my grandfather and steal everything from him, and they would have used his love for me as another weapon in their scheme. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from both parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What do you say to people who raised you when you discover they're monsters? How do you process the fact that every family dinner, every holiday, every I love you had been tainted by their greed? By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to be their victim, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they'd done to Grandpa. The next day at Mr. Patterson's office, I signed the property transfer documents with steady hands. The farm was officially mine, along with all the evidence of my parents' crimes. But I also asked him to prepare something else. A formal complaint to the district attorney's office detailing every theft my parents had committed. Are you sure about this, Savannah? Mr. Patterson asked gently. Once we file these charges, There's no going back. They stole from a sick old man who loved them, I replied. If I don't hold them accountable, who will? That afternoon, I drove out to the farm for the first time as its owner. The property was even more beautiful than I remembered. 1,200 acres of prime Oregon farmland, complete with a restored 19th century farmhouse, modern barn facilities, and a timber operation that generated substantial passive income. Grandpa had built something magnificent here, and my parents had seen it only as a piggy bank to raid. I was walking through the house, remembering Sunday afternoons spent learning to bake Grandpa's famous apple pie, when I heard vehicles pulling up outside. Through the window, I watched my parents and Uncle Robert emerge from two separate trucks, their faces set with determination. This was it. The confrontation I'd been dreading. Dad didn't bother knocking. He walked through the front door like he owned the place, which I suppose Head expected to. Savannah, we need to discuss this inheritance situation. There's nothing to discuss, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. The farm is mine. Grandpa made his decision. Mom stepped forward, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without the mask of maternal concern. Her eyes were cold, calculating. Sweetheart, you have to understand. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. We're family. We can work this out without involving lawyers. The way you worked things out when you stole $147,000 from him. Uncle Robert's face flushed red. Your grandfather was confused about his finances. We were helping him manage his money. By stealing it. Dad moved closer, and something in his posture made me step back instinctively. Listen carefully, Savannah. You're going to sign that property back over to us. We know what's best for this land. And if I don't, then you'll find out what happens to little girls who don't respect their family. The threat hung in the air between us. This man had taught me to ride a bike, helped with my homework, walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. And now he was threatening me over money. But I wasn't the same naive young woman who'd walked into that lawyer's office 2 days ago. Grandpa had left me more than property. Head left me the truth about who these people really were. Actually, I have a better idea, I said, pulling out my phone. I've already filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. Detective Sarah Morrison will be contacting you within the week. The color drained from all three of their faces. You can't do that, Mom whispered. We're your family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't threaten each other. And family definitely doesn't plan to have their patriarch declared mentally incompetent so they can rob him blind. Dad's hands clenched into fists. You have no idea what you're doing. Do you think you can manage this place by yourself? Do you think you understand the first thing about farming or business? I'll learn. Or I'll hire people who know what they're doing. But I'll never, ever let you touch Grandpa's legacy again. Uncle Robert tried a different approach. Savannah, be reasonable. We're talking about a lot of money here. More than you know how to handle. Why don't we work out a fair split? Fair. The word came out sharper than I intended. What would be fair is if you paid back every penny you stole from a dying man who trusted you. Mom started crying then, but even her tears looked calculated. How can you be so cruel to us? We raised you. We loved you. No, I said quietly. You raised me to be useful to you. There's a difference. I walked toward the door, indicating the conversation was over. You have until the end of the week to remove any personal belongings from this property. After that, you're trespassing. Dad stepped into my path, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Savannah. You think you can steal our inheritance and just walk away? Well, see about that. Yes, I agreed. We will see about that. As I watched them drive away, I realized my hands were shaking again. But this time it wasn't from fear or shock, it was from adrenaline. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to the people who'd controlled me with guilt and obligation disguised as love. I had no idea that their next move would be so much worse than anything I could have imagined. The lawsuit papers arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by a nervous-looking process server who apologized twice before handing me the thick manila envelope. My parents weren't just contesting the will. They were claiming I had manipulated my grandfather into changing it, alleging elder abuse, and demanding immediate return of all property plus damages for emotional distress. I sat on Grandpa's old porch swing, reading through page after page of legal accusations that painted me as a calculating monster who'd preyed on a vulnerable old man. According to their version of events, I'd isolated my grandfather from his family, convinced him his sons were stealing from him, and coerced him into changing his will while he was mentally compromised. The most devastating part? They'd hired Margaret Chen, one of Portland's most ruthless family law attorneys, known for her scorched-earth tactics in inheritance disputes. The retainer alone for someone like her would cost more than most people made in a year. My phone rang, and I recognized Mr. Patterson's number. "I just received a copy of the complaint," he said without preamble. "They're playing hardball. Savannah, Margaret Chen doesn't take cases unless she thinks she can win big. What does this mean for me? It means we need to prepare for war. They're going to try to prove your grandfather was mentally incompetent when he made the will, and they'll argue that you manipulated him. The good news is, we have all of Edgar's medical records proving his sound mind. The bad news is, Chen specializes in making juries doubt those kinds of records." That afternoon, I drove into Portland to meet with Elizabeth Harper, the attorney Mr. Patterson had recommended. Her office overlooked the Willamette River, and everything about her presence screamed competence. She was probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "I've reviewed your case," she said, spreading documents across her conference table. "Your parents are claiming you committed elder abuse by convincing your grandfather that his sons were stealing from him. They're saying you fabricated evidence to turn him against his family. But Grandpa documented everything himself. He hired the private investigator, installed the cameras, kept all the records. I know, but Chen's strategy will be to argue that you manipulated him into doing all of that. She'll claim you fed him paranoid delusions about his sons stealing from him. The weight of what I was facing finally hit me. Can she actually win with that argument?" Elizabeth's expression was grim. Margaret Chen once convinced a jury that a woman's own children had brainwashed her into leaving them out of her will in favor of her dog shelter. Never underestimate what a skilled attorney can make a jury believe. So what do? We fight fire with fire. We need character witnesses who can testify to your relationship with your grandfather and your parents' behavior. We need to establish a clear timeline showing when your parents' financial troubles began and when the theft started. Most importantly, we need to prove that your grandfather's decision was rational and well-informed, not the result of manipulation. Over the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into building our case. The first person I called was Mrs. Dorothy Henley, Grandpa's next-door neighbor for 23 years. She was 78 years old with a memory like a steel trap and absolutely no patience for nonsense. "Oh, honey," she said when I explained the situation, "I'd be happy to testify. I saw how those parents of yours treated your grandfather, especially toward the end." "What do you mean?" "Your mother stopped visiting entirely about 6 months before he passed. Said he was getting difficult. Your father only came by when he needed to borrow equipment or wanted to discuss selling cattle. But you? Every Sunday like clockwork, bringing groceries and staying for hours." She paused, and I could hear her getting emotional. "Edgar told me he was worried about his finances. Said numbers weren't adding up, but whenever he asked your father about discrepancies, David would get angry and accuse him of being confused. Would you be willing to testify to that in court, sweetheart? I'd crawl to that courthouse if I had to. Your grandfather was a good man, and what they did to him was shameful." Next, I contacted Dr. Martinez, Grandpa's physician for the past 12 years. He agreed to testify about Grandpa's mental state and confirmed that all cognitive assessments had shown normal function right up until his death. But the most valuable ally turned out to be someone I hadn't expected. Jennifer Russo, the private investigator Grandpa had hired. She was a former police detective in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a mountain of evidence. "Your grandfather was one of the most thorough clients I've ever worked with," she told me over coffee. "He didn't want to believe his sons were stealing from him, so he insisted we document everything multiple times. We have video footage, bank records, witness statements, and financial analysis proving systematic theft over a 3-year period. Why didn't he confront them while he was alive?" Jennifer's expression darkened. "He was planning to, right after he updated his will. He wanted to give them one chance to confess and make things right. But then he got sick, and..." She shrugged sadly. He ran out of time. The evidence was overwhelming, but I was learning that in inheritance disputes, evidence sometimes mattered less than emotion. Margaret Chen was a master at making juries feel sorry for her clients, and she'd probably portray my parents as heartbroken family members being punished by a vindictive granddaughter. That's when Elizabeth suggested something that would change everything. "We need to go on the offensive," she said during one of our strategy meetings. "Your parents have been counting on you being too intimidated to fight back. They probably expected you to settle out of court and give them at least half the property." "What do you mean, go on the offensive?" "I mean, we file criminal charges for theft and elder abuse. Jennifer's evidence isn't just enough to defend the will, it's enough to send them to prison." The idea of my parents in prison made me feel sick, but Elizabeth was right. They'd been counting on my love for them to protect them from consequences. They'd weaponized my own compassion against me. "There's something else," Elizabeth continued. "I've been researching your Uncle Robert's finances. He's deeply in debt from a failed real estate investment. I think he's been pressuring your parents to get that inheritance money quickly." "How deeply in debt?" "Nearly $500,000. He took out loans against properties he doesn't actually own, using fraudulent documents. If he doesn't pay soon, he's facing bankruptcy and potentially fraud charges." The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about greed. It was about desperation. Uncle Robert needed that inheritance money to save himself from financial ruin, and had convinced my parents to help him steal it. "I think we need to have a conversation with the district attorney," I said finally. "If Uncle Robert is that desperate, he might be willing to testify against my parents in exchange for a plea deal." Elizabeth smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win." As I left her office that day, I realized something had fundamentally changed inside me. I was no longer the frightened young woman who'd been ambushed at a will reading. I was becoming someone who fought back, someone who refused to be victimized by people who should have protected me. But I had no idea how far my parents were willing to go to destroy me. Their next move would test everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me, and it would force me to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. Would you believe what they tried next? Because honestly, even I didn't see it coming, and I thought I'd already seen them at their worst. Stick around, because this story is about to take a turn that'll make your jaw drop. 2 days before our court date, I discovered just how low my parents were willing to sink. I was at the farm, meeting with a potential property manager, when my phone exploded with notifications. Facebook, Instagram, local news sites. My name was everywhere. The headline on Channel 8 Seconds website made my stomach drop. "Local woman accused of elder abuse in $1 million inheritance scandal." The story was devastating. An anonymous family source had provided reporters with a twisted version of events, claiming I'd manipulated my grandfather by telling him his sons were stealing from him. They'd somehow obtained photos of me at the farm, taken out of context to make it look like I was already moving in before Grandpa died. Worst of all, they'd shared private family photos showing me receiving expensive gifts from my grandfather over the years. Gifts I'd actually refused, but the photos made it look like I was constantly asking for money. Margaret Chen had orchestrated a media campaign designed to poison the jury pool before we ever stepped into court. But she'd made one critical mistake. In their desperation to destroy my reputation, they'd pushed too hard, too fast, and Elizabeth Harper was ready for them. "This is actually good for us," Elizabeth said when I called her, panicking. Chen just showed her hand, and she overplayed it. Anonymous sources, out-of-context photos, emotional manipulation. It reeks of desperation. How is public humiliation good for us? Because now we can prove they're willing to lie, manipulate, and destroy your reputation to get what they want. This media stunt just became evidence of their character. The next morning, Elizabeth held a press conference that changed everything. She stood in front of the courthouse with Jennifer Russo, Mrs. Henley, and Dr. Martinez, armed with a mountain of evidence that told the real story. "Miss Mackenzie's parents have chosen to try this case in the court of public opinion using lies and manipulation," Elizabeth announced. "So let's examine the facts." She methodically presented the evidence: bank records showing systematic theft, video footage of my father removing cattle without authorization, recorded conversations where my parents discussed having Grandpa declared incompetent. Medical records proving Grandpa's sound mind until his death. But the knockout punch came when Jennifer Russo stepped forward with evidence we'd been saving. 3 days ago, David and Margaret Mackenzie approached me with an offer of $50,000 to change my testimony, Jennifer announced. They wanted me to claim that Savannah had hired me to fabricate evidence against them. The gathered reporters went wild. Attempting to bribe a witness wasn't just unethical, it was a felony. Fortunately, Jennifer continued, I recorded that conversation. The audio was damning. Dad's voice was clear as he offered Jennifer money to lie under oath. Well, make it worth your while if you tell the court that Savannah put you up to this investigation business. Mom's voice followed. She's young and naive. She doesn't understand what she's destroying. We're the real victims here. Within hours, the story had flipped completely. Local news was now calling it the Mackenzie inheritance fraud case, and public opinion had swung decisively in my favor. But the real vindication came in court. Judge Patricia Williams was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, who'd clearly done her homework. When Margaret Chen stood to make her opening statement about my supposed manipulation of my grandfather, Judge Williams cut her off. Miss Chen, before you proceed, I need to address some concerning developments in this case. I've received evidence that your clients attempted to bribe a key witness. Additionally, I've reviewed the media campaign launched against the plaintiff, which appears to constitute harassment and defamation. Chen's face went pale. Your Honor, we had no knowledge of any alleged bribery attempt. Really? Because I have recordings suggesting otherwise. The next 3 hours were brutal for my parents. Elizabeth systematically dismantled every argument Chen made. When Dad took the stand to claim he'd never stolen from Grandpa, Elizabeth played video footage of him loading cattle into unmarked trailers. When Mom testified that she'd always had Grandpa's best interests at heart, Elizabeth presented bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals that coincided with Mom's shopping sprees. The most devastating moment came when Uncle Robert took the stand. Facing his own fraud charges and bankruptcy, Head finally decided to tell the truth. David convinced me that the old man was losing his mind. Robert testified, unable to meet my eyes. He said we needed to get control of the finances before Savannah talked him into giving everything away. I was desperate. I owed money to some very dangerous people. And what did David propose? Elizabeth asked. That we take what we could now and worry about the consequences later. He said once Dad was declared incompetent, we could claim any missing money was due to his confused state. Margaret Chen objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. My parents hadn't just stolen from my grandfather. They'd planned to frame his mental decline for their crimes. Judge Williams didn't even need to recess to make her decision. This court finds that Edgar Mackenzie was of completely sound mind when he executed his final will, she announced. The evidence of systematic theft by David and Margaret Mackenzie is overwhelming and disturbing. Not only was Mr. Edgar Mackenzie's decision to change his will rational, it was necessary to protect his assets from further theft. She turned to look directly at my parents. Furthermore, this court is appalled by the defendant's attempt to bribe a witness and their harassment of the plaintiff through media manipulation. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate criminal investigation. Chen tried one last desperate motion. Your Honor, we respectfully request that the property be held in trust until Miss Chen. Your clients are lucky they're not in jail right now. This case is dismissed. Miss Mackenzie retains full ownership of all inherited property, and am awarding her legal fees and damages for the harassment she's endured. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. I watched my parents leave that courthouse in handcuffs as reporters shouted questions. Dad wouldn't look at me, but Mom turned back once, her face twisted with rage and something that might have been regret. Elizabeth squeezed my shoulder. It's over, Savannah. You won. But looking at the broken remains of what had once been my family, I wasn't sure anyone had really won anything. The weeks following the trial felt like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. My parents' arrest made national news, not because inheritance disputes are particularly unusual, but because the sheer audacity of their scheme captured public imagination. Oregon couple arrested for $1 million elder abuse scam became a trending topic on social media, complete with viral TikTok videos analyzing the case. I moved into Grandpa farmhouse full-time, partly because I needed to start managing the property, but mostly because my old apartment felt haunted by memories of family dinners and holiday celebrations that now seemed like elaborate lies. Every photo on my mantelpiece, every voicemail from Mom asking how my day went, every birthday card signed, "Love, Dad," all of it felt contaminated by the knowledge of who they really were. The property itself became my salvation. 1,200 acres of Oregon farmland doesn't manage itself, and throwing myself into learning about crop rotations, timber harvests, and cattle management gave me something to focus on besides the wreckage of my family relationships. Mrs. Henley became an unexpected mentor. Shed lived next to the farm her entire adult life and knew more about its operations than I could learn in years of study. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told me one afternoon as we watched contractors repair fencing that had been neglected for months. "He always said this land needed someone who cared about more than just the money it could generate." The money, it turned out, was both a blessing and a burden. The farm generated substantial income from timber sales, crop harvests, and lease agreements with neighboring ranchers. Combined with the life insurance payout and liquid assets Grandpa had accumulated, I was suddenly responsible for managing wealth I'd never imagined possessing. But wealth couldn't buy back the family I'd lost, and it certainly couldn't erase the knowledge of what they'd done. The criminal trial began 6 months later. Uncle Robert had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, receiving 5 years probation and restitution payments. My parents, however, had decided to fight the charges, apparently convinced they could charm their way out of consequences the same way they'd manipulated people their entire lives. Watching them in orange jumpsuits during the arraignment was surreal. These were the people Wood taught me to tie my shoes, helped with homework, and tucked me in at night. Now they sat in a defendant's box, charged with elder abuse, theft, and attempted bribery. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Michael Torres, a man in his 40s who'd built his reputation on white-collar crime cases. He methodically presented the same evidence that had demolished their civil case, but this time the stakes were prison sentences instead of money. Mom took the stand in her own defense, and for a moment, watching her cry as she described her love for Grandpa, I almost believed her myself. She was that convincing. "Edgar was like a father to me," she testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I would never hurt him. Any money I borrowed was always intended to be paid back once David's farming operations became more profitable." But District Attorney Torres was ready for her performance. "Mrs. Mackenzie, you testified that you considered Edgar like a father. Is it normal to install hidden cameras to spy on someone you consider a father figure?" "I don't know what you mean. You testified that you had no knowledge of any security cameras in Edgar's home, but we have footage of you searching his study for hidden recording devices just 2 weeks before his death. You knew he was documenting your theft, didn't you?" The footage was devastating. It showed Mom systematically searching Grandpa's home office, checking behind picture frames and under furniture. She wasn't visiting out of love. She was conducting counterintelligence. Dad's testimony was even worse. His attorney had apparently advised him to show remorse, but Dad's version of remorse involved blaming everyone else for his choices. "My father was getting confused about money," he insisted. "We were trying to protect him from making poor decisions. Savannah had been filling his head with paranoid ideas about us stealing from him." "Mr. Mackenzie, how do you explain the video footage of you removing cattle from your father's property without authorization? Those cattle needed to be moved for their safety. The fencing was inadequate. And the $47,000 you received from selling those cattle? Where did that money go?" Dad's jaw tightened. Farm operations require cash flow management that my father didn't understand anymore. "So you decided to provide that cash flow management by stealing his cattle and keeping the proceeds." "I was protecting family assets by transferring them to your personal accounts." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Dad received 8 years for elder abuse, theft, and attempted bribery. Mom got 6 years for the same charges. The judge's comments during sentencing stayed with me for months afterward. "This court has rarely seen such a calculated betrayal of trust," Judge Martinez said. Edgar Mackenzie spent his final years discovering that the children Head loved and provided for were systematically robbing him. The defendants didn't just steal money. They stole his peace of mind and his faith in family loyalty. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't bring myself to watch my parents be led away to prison, even after everything they'd done. Instead, I was at the farm, working in Grandpa's garden, trying to understand how people I'd loved my entire life had turned out to be strangers. The media attention eventually died down, but the personal consequences continued rippling outward. Extended family members chose sides, with some relatives refusing to speak to me because they believed I should have worked things out privately rather than sending my parents to prison. Others reached out with apologies for not recognizing the signs of what had been happening. My cousin Sarah, Uncle Robert's daughter, called me crying one night. "I'm so sorry, Savannah. Dad told us Grandpa was getting confused about money, and we believed him. We should have paid more attention. You couldn't have known," I told her. I lived with them for 18 years and didn't know. But the hardest part wasn't the betrayal or the media attention or even the court proceedings. The hardest part was the silence. No more Sunday family dinners, no more holiday gatherings, no more phone calls asking how my day went, even if those calls had been motivated by guilt rather than love. I had won everything and lost everything simultaneously. The farm was mine, the money was mine, and the truth had been revealed for everyone to see. I just hadn't expected justice to feel quite so lonely. 2 years have passed since that courtroom gavel changed my life forever, and I'm writing this from the front porch of what I now simply call home. The Mackenzie farm has been transformed from a crime scene into something Grandpa would be proud of, a thriving agricultural operation that employs 12 local families and supports sustainable farming practices throughout our county. The money that my parents fought so desperately to steal has become a tool for building something meaningful. I established the Edgar Mackenzie Foundation, which provides grants to family farms struggling with financial hardship and offers legal assistance to elderly people who suspect they're being financially abused by relatives. If my experience taught me anything, it's that Grandpa's story wasn't unique. It happens more often than anyone wants to admit. Mrs. Henley still lives next door, though at 80 now, she's finally accepted my offers to help with her property maintenance. She's become the grandmother I never really had, teaching me everything from canning vegetables to reading weather patterns. Family isn't always about blood, she told me last Christmas, and I'm finally understanding what she meant. The farm itself has become a sanctuary for more than just me. Jennifer Russo, the private investigator who helped expose my parents' crimes, decided to leave the city and start a rural consulting business from our converted barn office. Elizabeth Harper brings her grandchildren here for summer visits, and they've convinced me to add a small petting zoo section that's become popular with local schools. I've also discovered I have a talent for agriculture that apparently runs in the Mackenzie bloodline, just not the criminal tendencies my parents exhibited. Under the guidance of our farm manager, Tom Bradley, we've increased crop yields by 30% and expanded into organic certification. Tom's daughter Jessica started working here part-time during high school and is now studying agricultural business with plans to eventually take over operations. She's everything I wish my parents had been: honest, hard-working, and genuinely caring about the land's legacy. The criminal justice system moved slowly, but it moved. Dad was released last month after serving 5 years of his 8-year sentence for good behavior. Mom still has 18 months remaining. Neither has attempted to contact me, which is probably for the best. Uncle Robert completed his probation and moved to Arizona, where his daughter Sarah says he's working construction and attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I've thought a lot about forgiveness over these 2 years. Not because anyone has asked for it, but because carrying anger felt like letting them steal something else from me. I've forgiven them in the sense that I no longer wake up furious or spend my days planning revenge. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending their actions didn't matter or welcoming them back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. The media attention eventually shifted to other scandals, but the Mackenzie case became something of a landmark in Oregon elder abuse law. The state legislature passed new requirements for financial institutions to report suspicious activity involving elderly account holders, and the Attorney General's office created a special unit dedicated to investigating inheritance fraud. Dr. Martinez, Grandpa's old physician, still stops by occasionally to check on me and see how the farm is progressing. Edgar would be amazed, he told me during his last visit. He worried that his legacy would die with him, but look what you've built. That legacy isn't just about the physical property or even the money. It's about the choice to do right when doing wrong would have been easier. Every time a struggling farm family receives a foundation grant, every time we help an elderly person escape financial abuse, every time we prove that integrity matters more than profit, that's Grandpa real inheritance. I've started dating again, something I never thought I'd be ready for. Mark is a veterinarian who specializes in large animals, and he understands both my love for this land and my complicated relationship with trust. He's patient with my tendency to overanalyze people's motives, and he brings his own wisdom about chosen family. His parents died when he was young, and he was raised by an aunt who showed him that love is about actions, not DNA. The hardest moments still come unexpectedly. Last week, I found an old photo tucked inside one of Grandpa's books. A picture of our family at my high school graduation, everyone smiling and looking genuinely happy. For a moment, I grieved not just for what I'd lost, but for what I now knew had never really existed in the first place. But then Jessica knocked on the door with soil samples from the North Field. Tom called with questions about next season's planting schedule, and Mrs. Henley invited me for dinner because she'd made too much pot roast again. Life moved forward, carried by people who choose to care about each other without ulterior motives. The farm has become more than just my home. It's become a proof of concept, proof that betrayal doesn't have to define your story, proof that money can be used to build rather than destroy, proof that family can be chosen rather than just endured. Grandpa's final gift wasn't really the land or the money. It was the truth about who I am when stripped of illusions about loyalty and obligation. I'm someone who fights for justice, who builds rather than tears down, who creates family from friendship and respect, rather than just accepting whatever circumstances provide. Every morning, I walk through property that truly belongs to me now, not because of what I inherited, but because of what I've chosen to build here. The sun rises over fields that feed families, timber that builds homes, and relationships that prove chosen family can be stronger than blood family. Sometimes justice looks like courtroom victories and prison sentences, but sometimes it looks like this: building something beautiful from the wreckage of betrayal and proving that integrity, in the end, is its own reward. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and justice-served stories. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the people who hurt us the most also give us the opportunity to discover our own strength. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, the family you choose can be more powerful than the family you're born into. Justice isn't always fast, but when it comes, it can change everything.